The lonely widow who rescued an abandoned puppy remained blissfully unaware that the trembling ball of fur huddled in the rain-soaked cardboard box was the last of a rare breed worth millions. Margaret Wilson stood motionless under her faded umbrella, raindrops sliding down its worn fabric like tears she'd long forgotten how to shed. The steady drumming on the canvas matched the hollow rhythm that had become her heartbeat in the 3 years since William's passing. The small whimper cut through the rain's white noise, barely audible yet somehow piercing straight through the carefully constructed walls around Margaret's heart. There, beside the overflowing trash bins at the end of Maple Street, sat a soggy box with "Free" scrawled in running ink across its side. Margaret shouldn't have stopped. She had a schedule to keep: pharmacy at 3:15, groceries at 4, home by 5:30 to watch the evening news in William's old armchair, the same routine she'd maintained with military precision since the funeral. Routines kept the emptiness at bay, or at least they helped her pretend it did. Another whimper, weaker this time. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she muttered, her voice rusty from disuse. Margaret approached the box with the caution of someone who had learned that new things only meant new ways to feel pain. Peering inside, she found herself looking into 2 enormous brown eyes, swimming with fear and something else, a desperate hope that made her chest tighten. The puppy was small enough to fit in her palm, with unusual silver-tipped fur matted against its thin frame. Its ears seemed too large for its head, giving it a comical, almost mythical appearance. But there was nothing funny about the way its ribs pressed against its skin, or how it shivered uncontrollably. "You're not my problem," Margaret told the puppy firmly, even as she knelt beside the box, her arthritic knees protesting against the wet pavement. The creature responded by pressing its nose against her wrinkled hand, the touch warm despite the chilly rain. Something shifted inside Margaret's chest, a rusty gear turning for the first time in years. Before she could talk herself out of it, she had tucked the puppy inside her coat, against the cashmere sweater William had given her on their last Christmas together. "Just until the storm passes," she promised herself. The puppy's heart fluttered like a frightened bird against her own, 2 broken rhythms somehow finding a synchrony in their shared solitude. Margaret's cottage at the end of Elderberry Lane had once been a place of warmth and laughter. Now it stood as a monument to grief, preserved exactly as it had been the day William took his last breath in the sunroom, surrounded by his beloved orchid collection. She hadn't moved a single bloom since, watching them wither one by one, unable to care for them but unwilling to dispose of anything he had loved. She placed the puppy on a towel in the kitchen, the only room that still felt somewhat lived in. It looked even smaller and more fragile under the harsh overhead light, its unusual coloring more apparent, silvery gray with striking blue-black markings along its spine and tail. "You need a bath and food, and then it's off to the shelter in the morning," Margaret informed the puppy, who responded by tilting its head, those oversized ears flopping comically. For a moment, brief but startling in its clarity, Margaret felt the unfamiliar tug of a smile at her lips. She warmed milk on the stove and soaked some bread in it, the way she'd done for strays as a girl on her father's farm. The puppy ate ravenously, then promptly fell asleep on the towel, its tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Margaret should have gone about her evening routine, dinner at exactly 6:15, followed by precisely 1 hour of reading before bed at 9 o'clock sharp. Instead, she found herself sitting at the kitchen table, watching the puppy sleep until the clock struck midnight. "What am I doing?" she whispered to the silent house. The orchids in the sunroom seemed to rustle in response, though there wasn't a breath of wind. Morning brought reluctant sunshine and a transformation in the puppy. Cleaned of mud and somewhat recovered from its ordeal, it revealed a coat that seemed to shimmer in the light streaming through the kitchen window. Silver-gray fur with distinctive markings that formed almost symmetrical patterns down its back. Those 2 large ears now stood alert, giving the puppy a perpetually attentive expression. It followed Margaret around the kitchen as she prepared her solitary breakfast of toast and tea, occasionally bumping against her slippered feet with an enthusiasm that felt invasive after years of careful isolation. "The shelter opens at 10, she reminded herself out loud. The puppy sat at her feet and attempted a bark that came out as more of a melodic yip, a sound so incongruous with its appearance that Margaret actually laughed. The sound startled them both, echoing in the kitchen like an intruder. How long had it been since laughter had filled these walls? Margaret's fingers trembled as she reached for the phone book. The animal shelter's number swam before her eyes, the digits blurring inexplicably. The puppy chose that moment to place a paw on her foot, as if sensing her intentions. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, but put the phone book away. "One more day won't hurt. You need to regain your strength before they find you a proper home." That day stretched into 3, then a week. Margaret found herself creating a makeshift bed using one of William's old sweaters, telling herself it was practical, not sentimental. She bought proper dog food at the corner store, ignoring Mrs. Henderson's raised eyebrows and probing questions. "Just temporary," she explained stiffly, adding dog shampoo to her purchases at the last minute. Each night, Margaret told herself that tomorrow would be the day she'd make the call to the shelter. Each morning, she found another reason to delay. The puppy, whom she steadfastly refused to name, began to flourish. Its coat grew more lustrous, revealing increasingly intricate patterns that seemed to shift in different lights. It displayed an intelligence that sometimes unnerved Margaret, watching her with an intensity that made her feel truly seen for the first time since William's death. On the 9th day, Dr. Abernathy from the veterinary clinic down the street stopped Margaret as she walked past with the puppy tucked under her arm. "Mrs. Wilson," he called, jogging across the street with surprising agility for a man in his 60s. May I see your dog?" "It's not my dog," Margaret said automatically. "I found it. I'm just looking after it until—" Her voice trailed off as Dr. Abernathy's expression shifted from curiosity to astonishment. He reached out tentatively toward the puppy, who sniffed his hand with cautious interest. "My God," he whispered. "I think this might be a Lyonnais Shepherd. I haven't seen one in— Well, I've only ever seen them in textbooks." "A what?" Margaret clutched the puppy closer instinctively. "A Lyonnais Shepherd. They were bred in a remote region of France, primarily as companions for nobility. They were thought to be extinct since the 1940s. His eyes gleamed with academic excitement. "The markings are distinctive. Those symmetrical patterns down the back are characteristic of the breed. And those ears— May I?" He gestured toward the puppy. Margaret hesitated, then nodded. Dr. Abernathy examined the puppy with gentle expertise, murmuring to himself, "The cranial structure, the ear placement? And look at that tail curl. Classical Lyonnais traits." He straightened, looking at Margaret with new respect. "Where did you find this puppy, Mrs. Wilson? In a box?" "By the trash on Maple Street." Her voice hardened. "Someone threw it away like garbage." Something flashed in Dr. Abernathy's eyes. Calculation, perhaps. "Would you consider selling this dog? I have contacts at several universities who would be extremely interested." "The research value alone—" "Research?" Margaret interrupted, her arms tightening around the puppy. "You mean experiments?" No, nothing invasive. Just study documentation. This could be an incredible discovery. Financially speaking, a confirmed Lyonnais Shepherd would be worth— "It's not for sale," Margaret said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "Good day, doctor." She turned and walked away, her heart pounding. The puppy licked her wrist, its small tongue warm against her pulse point. That evening, as rain tapped gently against the windows, Margaret sat in William's chair with the puppy curled in her lap. For the first time, she allowed herself to stroke its silky head, without pretending it was just to check for ticks or matted fur. "A Lyonnais Shepherd," she murmured. The puppy's ears perked up at the sound of her voice. "What an extraordinary thing you are to survive when everyone thought your kind was gone." The puppy yawned, revealing a pink tongue and tiny teeth. "I know something about that," Margaret continued, her voice soft. "Surviving when you're not sure you want to. When it seems like everything that made life worth living is gone." The puppy shifted, resting its head directly over Margaret's heart. In the quiet of the evening, with rain creating a gentle soundtrack, Margaret made a decision. "Lyons," she said. "That's what I'll call you. Not that you're staying," she added hastily. "But I can't keep calling you puppy while I figure things out." Lyons responded by sighing contentedly, as if approving the name. Sleep came easier that night than it had in years, with the small, warm body curled against her side. For the first time since William's death, Margaret didn't dream of hospitals or funeral homes or empty rooms. Instead, she dreamed of running through a field, the scent of wildflowers filling her lungs, laughter bubbling up from some long-forgotten place inside her. Margaret awoke to sunlight and the sensation of something changing. The air in the cottage felt different somehow, as if the dust of grief had begun to shift. Over the next few weeks, the careful rhythm of Margaret's life began to transform. Walks with Lyons became part of her routine, first just around the block, then to the small park 3 streets over. The puppy grew stronger daily, its distinctive coat drawing attention wherever they went. "What kind of dog is that?" became a question Margaret heard so often she developed a stock answer. "He's a mixed breed," she would say, hurrying along before further questions could follow. But the inquiries persisted. People who had never spared Margaret a glance now stopped to admire Lyons, whose unusual appearance and intelligence made him impossible to ignore. Some offered to buy him outright, making increasingly generous offers that Margaret refused with growing indignation. "He's not for sale," became her mantra, delivered with increasing firmness. Dr. Abernathy appeared at her door one evening in early autumn, his expression grave. "Mrs. Wilson, I feel I should warn you. I've been making inquiries about your dog, and word has spread. There are collectors, breeders, who would pay extraordinary sums for a purebred Lyonnais." Margaret's hand tightened on the doorknob. "I told you he's not for sale." "I understand that, Doctor," Abernathy said, lowering his voice. "But not everyone will respect your wishes." The last confirmed Lyonnais sold at auction in 1938 for what would be millions in today's money. "If this puppy is indeed the last of its kind," he trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "Just be careful." After he left, Margaret sat on the floor beside Lyons, who had grown from a trembling ball of fur into a sleek, intelligent companion with the most expressive eyes she'd ever seen on an animal. "What are we going to do?" she asked him. Lyons tilted his head, then licked her hand. The simple gesture brought tears to her eyes, the first she'd allowed herself in years. They fell silently, dropping onto Lyons' silver coat where they glistened like morning dew. That night, Margaret did something she hadn't done since William died. She opened his study, a room she'd kept locked and untouched. The scent of his cologne still lingered faintly in the air, preserved like an insect in amber. William's law books lined the shelves, his reading glasses still resting on top of a legal brief. Margaret moved to his desk with purpose, pulling out drawers until she found what she sought: William's contact book. She ran her finger down the alphabetized entries until she found the name she was looking for: James Harrington, William's former law partner and their close friend for decades. She hadn't spoken to James since the funeral, had ignored his calls and letters until they eventually stopped coming. The guilt of that neglected friendship sat heavy as she dialed his number. "James? It's Margaret Wilson," her voice caught. "I need your help." James arrived the next morning, embracing Margaret with the warmth of old friendship, asking no questions about her long silence. His eyes, behind the same horn-rimmed glasses he'd worn for 30 years, widened at the sight of Lyons. "So this is the famous puppy," he said, kneeling despite his arthritic knees to offer his hand to Lyons, who sniffed it thoroughly before allowing a cautious pat. "Extraordinary coloring." Over tea in the kitchen, a room that had become surprisingly welcoming again, Margaret explained the situation. James listened attentively, taking notes in the same meticulous handwriting she remembered from decades of Christmas cards. "So you want to keep him safe, but you're worried about these collectors and breeders, Dr. Abernathy mentioned?" Margaret nodded, watching Lyons as he explored the sunroom, carefully navigating around William's orchids, which, she realized with a start, she had begun watering again. "The irony is," she said slowly, 3 months ago I would have sold him without a second thought. I didn't want anything in my life that required care or attachment." She met James's understanding gaze. "But now he matters." James finished for her. "He saved me," Margaret said simply. "I was just existing, not living. He brought me back to life." James reached across the table and squeezed her hand, a gesture of such simple human connection that Margaret felt tears threatening again. "Then we'll make sure you both stay safe," he promised. "I have some ideas." Those ideas evolved into action over the following days. James connected Margaret with a veterinary geneticist who could verify Lyons' breed without publicizing the results. The confirmation came back unequivocal. Lyons was indeed a purebred Lyonnais shepherd, likely the last of his kind. Without a breeding program, the Lyonnais will become extinct when Lyons dies, the geneticist explained during a confidential meeting in James's office. The breed's genetic profile contains markers unseen in any other canine lineage. From a scientific perspective, it's a remarkable discovery. And from a financial perspective? Margaret asked directly. The geneticist hesitated. The value is substantial. 7 figures easily, possibly 8 to the right buyer. Margaret absorbed this information with surprising calm. Then we need to ensure those right buyers never find him. James's legal strategy was multi-pronged. First, he helped Margaret register Lyons as a standard mixed-breed dog with the local authorities. Then, he created a trust fund in Lyons' name, with Margaret as trustee, protecting both their interests. If anything happens to you, James explained, the trust guarantees Lyons will be cared for according to your wishes, not sold to the highest bidder. Most importantly, James introduced Margaret to Eliza Chen, director of a small, privately funded canine conservation program. Eliza visited the cottage on a bright October afternoon, her expertise evident in the way she interacted with Lyons, respectful, observant, letting him set the pace of their introduction. "He's magnificent," Eliza said, examining the distinctive markings along Lyons' back. The Lyonnais were renowned for their intelligence and loyalty. They could supposedly recognize their owner's emotions and respond accordingly. Margaret thought of how Lyons always seemed to know when her grief was heaviest, how he would press against her leg or bring her his favorite toy on the days when memories threatened to pull her back into darkness. "I believe that," she said softly. Eliza outlined her proposal carefully. "Our program focuses on preserving rare breeds through ethical breeding practices. We never sell dogs. We place them with carefully screened families who understand their historic and genetic significance. You want to breed Lyons?" Margaret stated, her arms crossing protectively. "Eventually, yes, but only if it's in his best interest, and only with your full involvement." Eliza's expression was earnest. "Mrs. Wilson, you've been given an extraordinary opportunity. This isn't just about one dog, it's about preserving a living piece of history." Margaret looked at Lyons, who had settled at her feet with the absolute trust of a creature who knew it was home. The thought of sharing him, of allowing others to claim some part of what they had together, created a knot of resistance in her chest. "I need time to think," she said finally. That night, as autumn wind rattled the windows, Margaret wrote in a journal for the first time since William's illness. The words poured out of her, the pain of loss, the unexpected gift of Lyons, her fears and hopes, and the gradual reawakening she'd experienced over the past months. "William would tell me I'm being selfish," she wrote. "He always believed in the greater good, in contributing to something larger than ourselves. But he never had to feel this emptiness, this fear of losing something precious again." Lyons watched her from his bed, no longer makeshift, but a proper dog bed positioned beside her own, his eyes reflecting the lamplight with an almost supernatural awareness. "What would you choose?" she asked him. As if in answer, Lyons rose from his bed and padded to the bay window that overlooked the garden. He placed his paws on the windowsill and gazed out at the world beyond their cottage. Something about his posture, expectant, curious, struck Margaret with unexpected clarity. The next morning, she called Eliza and agreed to a modified version of the conservation program. Lyons would remain with Margaret, but would participate in a carefully managed breeding program once he reached maturity. Any puppies would be placed with families personally approved by Margaret, and a portion would be retained by the conservation program to ensure genetic diversity. "You're making the right decision," Eliza assured her. "You're giving his breed a future." "I'm not doing it for his breed," Margaret replied honestly. "I'm doing it for him. He deserves to have a family, to leave something behind." She paused, surprising herself with her next words. "We all do." Winter settled over the cottage, transforming the garden into a wonderland of frost and silence. Margaret found herself hosting regular visitors for the first time in years. James with legal updates, Eliza with breeding program details, even Dr. Abernathy, who had proven himself trustworthy and become a valuable ally in keeping Lyons' true identity from becoming public knowledge. Most surprisingly, Margaret reconnected with her daughter Catherine, from whom she'd grown distant during William's illness and after his death. Their first phone call was awkward, filled with careful navigation around 3 years of silence. But when Margaret mentioned Lyons, the conversation had shifted. "You got a dog?" Catherine's surprise was evident even across the phone line. "Dad always wanted a dog, but you always said—" "I know what I said," Margaret interrupted, then softened her tone. "Things change. I've changed." The silence that followed felt different, thoughtful rather than strained. "I'd like to meet him," Catherine said finally. "Your dog." "I'd like that too," Margaret replied, meaning it. Catherine's visit was scheduled for Christmas, the first time Margaret would celebrate the holiday since William's passing. As the date approached, Margaret found herself cleaning the cottage, bringing decorations down from the attic, even baking cookies from William's mother's recipe that had once been a family tradition. Lyons supervised these activities with apparent approval, his tail wagging whenever Margaret unearthed another holiday decoration or hummed a fragment of a Christmas carol she'd thought long forgotten. "This is your fault," she told him half accusingly as she struggled to untangle a string of lights. "I was perfectly content in my misery before you came along." Lyons responded by bringing her one of his toys, a small stuffed reindeer James had given him, and dropping it in her lap with a meaningful look. The night before Catherine's arrival, a snowstorm blanketed Elderberry Lane in pristine white. Margaret stood at the window with Lyons beside her, watching fat flakes swirl in the glow of the streetlights. "She might not come," Margaret whispered, voicing her deepest fear. "The roads might be too bad, or she might change her mind." Lyons pressed against her leg, warm and solid. In that moment, Margaret realized she was no longer the same woman who had found a shivering puppy in a rain-soaked box. That woman had been a ghost, moving through the motions of a life she no longer wanted. This woman, the one with plans and fears and tentative hopes, was someone new, or perhaps someone rediscovered. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright, the world transformed into a glistening wonderland. Margaret woke early, her stomach fluttering with anticipation and dread. She'd set Catherine's old room ready, placed carefully chosen gifts under the small tree she'd put up in the living room, prepared William's favorite Christmas morning coffee cake. At precisely 11:03 a.m., a car pulled into the driveway. Margaret watched from the window, her heart hammering as Catherine stepped out, taller than she remembered, her dark hair now streaked with premature gray. She was followed by a man Margaret recognized as David, Catherine's husband of 10 years, and then, unexpectedly, a small girl of about 5, bundled in a red coat with matching mittens. "My granddaughter," Margaret breathed. She'd known, intellectually, that Catherine had a child, but they'd been so estranged that she'd never met her. The realization of what she'd missed, what she'd denied herself, hit with physical force. Lyons barked once, the sound pulling Margaret from her shock. He raced to the door, tail wagging so hard his entire body shook. The doorbell rang. Margaret smoothed her sweater, took a deep breath, and opened the door to whatever came next. "Mom," Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion. "Merry Christmas." "Catherine," Margaret replied, her own voice barely a whisper. "You came?" "We all did." Catherine gestured to her family. "This is Lily, your granddaughter." The little girl peered up with curious eyes. William's eyes, Margaret realized with a pang. "Hello, Lily," Margaret managed. "I'm very happy to meet you. Is that your doggie?" Lily asked, pointing at Lyons, who sat with uncharacteristic patience, as if understanding the importance of this moment. "Yes," Margaret said, then corrected herself. "No, he's family." She stepped back, opening the door wider. "Please come in, all of you." As they crossed the threshold, Lyons gave a joyful bark and circled the newcomers, his enthusiasm breaking the tension. Lily giggled, David smiled, and Catherine met Margaret's eyes with cautious hope. "He's beautiful," Catherine said, kneeling to let Lyons sniff her hand. "What's his name?" "Lyons," Margaret replied. "He was abandoned and I found him when I needed him most." Something passed between mother and daughter then, an understanding perhaps, or the beginning of forgiveness. "We have a lot to talk about," Catherine said quietly. "Yes," Margaret agreed. "We do. But first, come meet him properly. He's very special." As the family moved into the living room, with Lily already chattering excitedly to Lyons as if they were old friends, Margaret caught a glimpse of the sunroom. There, among William's orchids, now flourishing again under her renewed care, a new bloom had opened, its petals catching the winter sunlight. Life, Margaret realized, could return in the most unexpected ways. Through a rain-soaked box at the end of Maple Street, through a silver-coated puppy with ancient bloodlines, through a door open to family long kept at a distance, through the courage to love again, knowing full well the risk of loss that love always carried. Lyons looked back at her from amid his new admirers, those intelligent eyes seeming to ask, was it worth it? Margaret smiled, truly smiled, and nodded. Yes, she thought, 1,000 times yes. 3 years later, on a warm spring afternoon, Margaret sat in a lawn chair in the expanded garden behind her cottage. Beside her, Eliza Chen made notes as they watched Lions, now a magnificent adult dog with a coat that shimmered like quicksilver in the sunlight, playing with his second litter of puppies. 6 silver balls of fur tumbled across the grass, their markings echoing their father's distinctive patterns. Their mother, a Lyonnais female discovered through genetic testing of shelter dogs across Europe, rested in the shade nearby. The conservation program has identified 3 more potential Lyonnais descendants, Eliza reported, her voice satisfied. With careful breeding, we should be able to establish a sustainable population within a decade. He'll have a legacy, Margaret mused, watching Lions gently correct a puppy who played too roughly with its sibling. So will you, Eliza pointed out. The Margaret Wilson Lyonnais Preservation Trust is already being cited as a model for ethical breed conservation. Margaret waved this away, still uncomfortable with the recognition her efforts had received. What had begun as a private desire to protect one special dog had evolved into something much larger: a foundation, educational programs, even a small museum dedicated to rare breeds and their cultural significance. The garden gate opened, and Lily, now 8 and devoted to her weekly visits with her grandmother, raced in, followed by Catherine and David at a more sedate pace. "Grandma, the puppies are awake." Lily dropped to her knees among the tumbling Lyonnais pups, who greeted her with enthusiasm. Lions came to press his head against Margaret's hand in greeting before returning to his watchful supervision. Catherine settled into the chair beside Margaret, passing her a glass of lemonade. "Mom, don't forget we have the foundation dinner next Friday. James says the new sponsors are very excited to meet you." "I haven't forgotten," Margaret assured her, though in truth she still found such events draining. She preferred the quiet work of raising the puppies, of ensuring each was placed with a family who would appreciate their unique heritage. As the afternoon light softened toward evening, Margaret found herself surrounded by a fullness she could never have imagined that rainy day 3 years ago. The garden bloomed with life, flowers she'd planted, puppies she'd helped bring into the world, families she'd reconnected with. Lions came to rest at her feet, his mission of supervising the puppies temporarily abandoned as they napped in a pile with Lily reading a book beside them. He looked up at Margaret with the same steady gaze that had first pierced her defenses. "You knew, didn't you?" she murmured, too low for the others to hear. "You knew what you were doing all along." Lions tilted his head, those distinctive ears perked forward attentively. Margaret reached down to stroke the silver fur that had proven to be worth millions, not in money, but in the richness it had brought back to a life she'd thought finished, in the emptiness that had been filled, in the heart that had remembered how to love. "Thank you," she whispered. Lions sighed contentedly and closed his eyes, secure in the knowledge that they had saved each other, and in doing so, had saved something precious for the world as well. Around them, life continued its beautiful, messy unfolding, puppies dreaming, families healing, legacy building. And at the center of it all, the unlikely pair who had found each other when they needed it most, a lonely widow and the last of a rare breed, both discovering that value cannot truly be measured in millions, but in moments of connection that transform emptiness into fullness, isolation into belonging, existence into life.